Good afternoon, everybody. This is Phoenix for All Talk Wrestling, and today I want to bring you guys a special All Talk Wrestling countdown list. Today I'm going to be going over what I believe are the 15 greatest Intercontinental champions in WWE history. The reason I'm doing 15 is because over 87 superstars, at least, have held the Intercontinental Championship. So coming down with a top 15 or even top 10 would have been super difficult, but I was kind of up to the task. It actually took me a couple of weeks to really deep dive into it and put this list together. It's not a most correct list, so I think that what I was able to come up together with it is fair. So that's why I'm going to be presenting it to you guys today. Now, I am going to be talking about Intercontinental champions that won the title specifically from 1984 down, when the IC title became 100% exclusive to WWE and wasn't kind of paired with NWA at that time. So any Intercontinental champions that won the title before that, like a Pedro Morales or a Pat Patterson, who was the inaugural Intercontinental champion, won't be on my list. Again, it's not to say that my list is the most correct, it's just the criteria that I decided to go off of when putting this together. In doing this list, there is specific criteria that I'm looking for on where I rank and place the superstars and who I do and don't have on the list. So the criteria that I'm looking for is, of course, accomplishments. How accomplished were you as the Intercontinental champion? Reigns, number of days spent as champion, and your longest reign all kind of factor into it. So that's where I'm getting that from. And number two is the marriage between the IC title and the superstar. How much did you elevate the championship at the time that you had it, as well as how well did the championship elevate you? So there are plenty of examples of superstars who win the Intercontinental Championship and it pushes them up a tick, but I don't know, like, they don't make the title feel as important. It almost kind of feels like they have it just because, like, they'll never be a champion. They kind of peaked where they're going to be. They don't float around the main event. It's just like they're guaranteed mid-carder. So that's why the way that I'm going to be putting this list together is kind of important, because it is going to give us a good idea of how I rank these superstars. And the last bonus criteria that I'll be looking at as well is the elevation. How well did you elevate as the Intercontinental champion to the eventual main event scene? You know, most people had always viewed the Intercontinental Championship as the workers' title. So it was the belt that when you had it, you were prepping yourself for the next level or the next step in your career. It's essentially the I got next title of pro wrestling in the WWE. So that's the way that I'm looking at it. Who had next is going to really determine how I rank these people as well. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into this list. As always, I'd like for you guys to continue to like the videos, comment on the videos, support the channel. I do appreciate it. I'm going to continue to try to put out wrestling content as much as I can. Sorry, I'm not being as active as I would like to be. My laptop and computer issues have really kind of slowed that down, but it's all a work in progress. Before I dive into this list, I want to throw you guys my honorable mention. So here are 5 superstars that I felt fit the bill to kind of fit somewhere in my list, just not enough in order to really put them there. So my 5 honorable mentions, and then we'll jump into the list. With that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. Number 15, we have the Honky Tonk Man. All right, so the Honky Tonk Man is a one-time Intercontinental champion, and he held the championship for a, to this day, record 452 days, recognized by the WWE as the Intercontinental champion. So somebody that has a historic feat like that being ranked at the very bottom of my list, essentially as number 15. Why would that be? Well, because the marriage between the Intercontinental Championship and the Superstar didn't quite fit the bill. Yes, Honky Tonk Man was the Intercontinental Champion, but do you think that he was a draw as the IC Champion? Do you really feel like the belt elevated him beyond where he could have been? Probably not. I mean, I wasn't around as much in order to see the Honky Tonk Man as the IC Champion, but from everything that I've ever seen, I mean, it really didn't feel like he was that dude. So I don't know, great accomplishment, and it was good enough to at least get him on this list because he was about to be an honorable mention, but I'm not going to disrespect him like that. So this is going to be his spot on my list. Coming in at number 14, we have RVD, Rob Van Damme. All right, so RVD is a 6-time Intercontinental Champion, and that's actually the third most on this list of all the superstars. But he spent an accumulated 224 days as the IC Champion, with his longest reign coming at only 64 days. So a couple of the things that kind of tick the boxes for RVD is the accomplishments. Yes, he was very accomplished to have the third most runs as the Intercontinental Champion, tied with Dolph Ziggler. That's actually a pretty good feat. The amount of days that he spent is kind of middle of the pack, if you ask me, especially to have 6 reigns. The reason that I have him as low as I do is because even though he was a great Intercontinental Champion, it didn't really feel like the marriage between Superstar and title was always there. Like, it was a good championship for him to have in the mid card, and I guess I can see the reason why he would have won it so many times, because there were so many superstars that, you know, he could have feuded with. He did feud with. He had great feuds for the Intercontinental Championship, but like, I don't know, like, he did eventually elevate to the role of world champion, and the title kind of served its purpose for him. But I don't know, it just didn't feel like he had as much of a marriage with the championship, but still good enough in order to make this list above other superstars. So there we go for him. Coming in at number 13, we have Jeff Hardy. All right, so Jeff Hardy is a 5-time Intercontinental Champion, and he spent an accumulated 359 days as the IC Champion, with his longest run coming at 189 days recognized by the company as the IC Champion. So those are some great accomplishments for a superstar like Jeff Hardy. You know, we kind of think about him as one of the greatest tag team competitors of all time, but realistically, he is one of the best Intercontinental Champions. It never really felt like the title was just thrown at him just because. For the longest amount of time in Jeff Hardy's career, it always felt like he had next. And every single time he won the Intercontinental Championship, it kind of showed why we believed as fans that he had next. So he ticked all the boxes. He has the accomplishments. He had a good marriage with the championship. It kind of elevated him, and he was able to make the title feel like a big deal every single time he came out with it. And for the bonus round, it pushed him up to eventual World Heavyweight and WWE Championship status. So I feel like 13 right here is a good number for Jeff Hardy. Like, he really deserves it and is one of the most underrated IC champions in the company's history. At number 12, we have Edge. So I kind of fit Edge into that same mold that I fit Jeff Hardy in. Edge is a 5-time Intercontinental Champion, actually, again, tied for the 4th most reigns on this list. He spent an accumulated 171 days as champion, and his longest run only come at 63 days. Now, that's not as well of an accomplishment in comparison to the person that he was ranked above, so why would I put him there? Well, just like with Jeff Hardy, he ticks all 3 of the boxes. Edge was a superstar that when he won the title, it kind of felt like a big deal, and he helped elevate the belt. The belt helped elevate him. His accomplishments are good enough in order to keep him in this list, at least to the rank that he is, but the bonus criteria is really the thing that kind of sets it off for him. once Edge won his final Intercontinental Championship, he was only competing for world titles and kind of floating around the main event scene. Not going to really count tag team title wins in that, but he established himself as the mid-carder that he was, and then he was ready to elevate to that next level as world champion. He never looked back down on the mid-card or the IC title. So the title did its job. Edge had next. He showed that he had next, and he never really relinquished that all the way up until the time he retired and then came back. Still floating around the main event scene. Hasn't been seen as of lately, but as far as great Intercontinental champions, number 12 is good for Edge on this list. So I got no problem with that. Another one of the most underrated IC champions in the company's history. At number 11, we have The Rock. So a lot of people aren't going to remember The Rock's run as IC champion, and it makes sense because it was so long ago in the mid to late 90s. Plus, we remember his time as the WWE champion more than anything else. But with all that being said, Rock is a two-time Intercontinental champion. He spent an accumulated 337 days as the IC champion, with his longest run coming at 264 days. And I believe that was his first run as the Intercontinental champion, when he identified at first as Rocky Maivia. Now, the championship didn't do a lot for him when he was a face. Like, people hated The Rock, and he easily would not have been a part of this list. But once he had his heel turn, joined the Nation of Domination, he was the Intercontinental champion. At that point in time, people really felt like he had next. So the championship was doing what it had to do, and he actually elevated it too. He made the IC championship feel important. And what ended up happening? The bonus criteria. He elevated up to world championship status after he lost his second Intercontinental champion and never looked back down in the mid-card. So Rock is one of those underrated IC champions that we don't talk about. I kind of group him and Stone Cold and Triple H all kind of in that same bucket, because in that particular point in the Attitude Era in the 90s, those were the three who were holding that title, and then they all elevated to world championship status. So good for number 11 on this list. Well deserved. Coming in at number 10, we have Randy Orton. So Randy Orton is one of the last examples of what the Intercontinental Championship was supposed to do for a young superstar who is looking to ascend in his career. Even though he is a one-time Intercontinental Champion and spent his reign with the title for 209 days, Randy Orton did with the IC title what he was supposed to, and subsequently, the title did for him what it was supposed to. He elevated that championship the whole time he had it as a member of Evolution. That title elevated him. And Randy Orton, to his credit, after he lost the IC champion for the bonus criteria, went on to win 13 world championships before he ever touched another mid-card title in the US championship several years later. So for me, that's really important. That's what it means to be a great Intercontinental champion, where you can hold the title once and you don't have to keep going back and forth for it over and over. You made your mark as the champion, you established yourself, and now you're ready for that next jump. Randy Orton took that. Like I said, he's one of the few superstars that we can look at and say he was a lasting example of what the Intercontinental Championship was supposed to stand for, what it was supposed to do, and how successful he came behind that. To me, number 10 on this list works out just well. Could have been a little bit higher if he maybe had a little bit longer of a reign, but I think that this is appropriate enough for him. Jumping in at number 9, we have The Game, Triple H. So, kind of piggybacking off of the same thing that I said with The Rock. Triple H is one of those superstars that benefited from the title, and the title benefited from him, even though, his reigns as the IC champion don't seem as memorable, because when you think of Triple H, you think of him as a world champion. But he is a 5-time IC champion, have held the title for an accumulated 200 days, and his longest reign was for 115 days. Now, I could have had Triple H a little bit higher on this list, considering the fact that he won 5 IC championships, but like for a brief period of time when he won his last Intercontinental Championship, it seemed like he was more of a second fiddle to Stone Cold when they were on their two-man power trip thing. Still elevated the title, still made it feel like a big deal, and him losing the title to an eventual superstar who also made this list in Jeff Hardy really was the elevation piece that he needed. But the good thing about it is once he stopped winning IC championships and he came back from injury, it was all world titles from there. So Triple H is one of those Attitude Era lasting examples of have the title where you got next, get next, and never relinquish that spot. So he hovered around that top tier of the card for the vast majority of his career. Can't be mad at that. So number 9 is fitting on this list for him. At number 8, we have Razor Ramon. Now, Scott Hall, Razor Ramon, however you want to identify him, is a 4-time Intercontinental Champion. He held the title for an accumulated 434 days, and his longest run was for 198 days. Now, when you think about Razor Ramon, you think about him and Shawn Michaels, you think about the ladder matches, you think about all the great moments. He identifies perfectly with the Intercontinental Champion. If anything, the marriage between champion and championship worked perfectly. Razor Ramon was the ideal IC champion. His accomplishments and the marriage between him and the title worked out beautifully. It's why I put him on my list. The reason I don't put him a little bit higher is because as accomplished and as great as an Intercontinental Champion he was, in the era where we also had other great Intercontinental champions that we'll eventually get to, he never felt like he had next, and that's disappointing. It's probably not his fault, so I'm not going to totally blame him for it, but it does speak to something. Razor Ramon should have easily been a world champion in the WWE, especially with how well he carried the Intercontinental Championship and the mid-card division at the time that he was the champ. So why is it that he never got that shot? Not 100% sure. I'm not going to completely bury him deeper into this list because of that, but I feel like number 8 is an appropriate spot for how well he was able to carry the championship at that time. At number 7, we have The Miz. Okay, so not that I completely agree with this placement, but at least allow me an opportunity to try to explain why I have him over some of the greats as far as Intercontinental Champions are concerned. First of all, Miz is an 8-time IC champion, which is actually the second most of any superstar in WWE history. He has a total amount of 592 accumulated days as the Intercontinental Champion. And since 1984, those are the most days as IC Champion, and his longest run was for 188 days. So for him to have the second most title reigns, and for him to have the most days spent as the Intercontinental Champion with a respectable 188-day run as his longest, why do I have him at number 7? Well, because he has the accomplishment part down pat. The elevation part didn't necessarily work out because he kind of got an Intercontinental Champion before he ever became WWE Champion, and all of his other reigns as IC Champion came before his second run, a more disappointing run, as IC Champion ever took place. To me, that doesn't spell greatness as far as the Intercontinental Champion is concerned. And then again, the marriage between champion and championship didn't always feel like it was there for The Miz. There was only 2 moments in his entire WWE career where he was IC champion where I knew about it and I cared about it. And that was after he cut the Talking Smack promo against Daniel Bryan and then feuded with Dolph Ziggler in arguably the feud of the year in 2016. And in 2018 when him, Balor, and Rollins were all beefing over the Intercontinental Champion. Sad to say, beyond that, I can't remember any of the Miz's reigns. I can't remember any of his moments as IC champion that stands out beyond those 2. So he didn't have a great marriage as far as championship and champion as IC champion, but his accomplishments are good enough for me to at least put him at number 7 on this list because he was able to elevate to a world champion for whatever that's worth. But yeah, The Miz, number 7 on my list. Coming in at number 6, we have the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. Now, Shawn Michaels is a 3-time Intercontinental Champion. He spent an accumulated 403 days as the champion, and his longest run was for 202 days. So Shawn Michaels is another example of those I got next with the championship, which worked out pretty well. Once he secured World Championship gold after he was elevated by the IC title, the title did its job. Shawn never really looked down on the mid card like that. I mean, I know he got a European Championship reign kind of fit in between when he was hovering around the top of the card. Not going to completely hold that against him, but yeah, like Shawn Michaels was an example of a superstar that checked all the boxes. He had the accomplishments. The marriage between championship and champion worked out for him, and he was elevated by the championship and left the championship in an elevated state when he was no longer at the top. So good enough for number 6 on my list. I'll put him there. Coming in at number 5, we got the Ultimate Warrior. So the Ultimate Warrior is a 2-time Intercontinental Champion who has spent 432 accumulated days as IC champion, and his longest run was for 216 days. And ironically, both of his Intercontinental Championship reigns were exactly 216 days. So he's the only superstar on this list that was able to accumulate 200-day reigns with the Intercontinental Championship multiple times. I can't take away that type of accomplishment. Warrior probably might not have had the greatest marriage with the championship, but for the time that he was champion after he beat the Honky Tonk Man, he definitely elevated the belt. And anybody that would have won the championship after Honky Tonk Man had it would have elevated the belt. Warrior just so happened to be the recipient of that. He made the title feel like a big deal, and it kind of felt like a big deal up until the time that he won the WWF Championship from Hulk Hogan, and then it was vacated. But the title did for Warrior what it was supposed to do. In his second reign, that's what really started to elevate him to you got next status. So I'm good with putting Ultimate Warrior at number 5 on my list. Coming in at number 4, we have the Hitman, Bret Hart. So Bret Hart is a 2-time IC champion who spent 288 days as the champion, and his longest run was for 146 days. That's not as accomplished as some of the people below him. So why do I have Bret Hart here? Well, it's pretty significant because everybody that Bret Hart feuded with for the Intercontinental Championship was a big deal. He made the title a big deal. And if anything, if you want to start looking at the criteria necessary for this list, Bret Hart may have been the reason why it was put where it was put. Think about it. He was a tag team specialist, went on to the mid-card, won the IC championship, and then elevated himself to world championship contention. Putting on classics against guys like the British Bulldog when he was all jacked up off coke and stuff like that, and still putting on arguably the greatest SummerSlam main event for the Intercontinental Championship of all time. That's saying something. And I believe, could be wrong, but I believe that he was the last IC champion to main event of SummerSlam. So if I'm wrong about that, that's cool. I'll research that a little bit later, but if he was, that speaks volumes itself. So have no problem putting Bret Hart here. He checked all the boxes, accomplished, great marriage, and elevated by the championship while leaving it in an elevated state itself. Coming in at number 3, we have Mr. Perfect, Curt Hennig. So, Mr. Perfect was a 2-time Intercontinental Champion, and he held the championship for a total of 404 days, with his longest reign coming at 280 days. Now, for Mr. Perfect to have not checked the final box of elevated, as in he no longer was in the mid-card and jumped to world championship status, is kind of sad. And I feel like if I ever did a list of superstars who should have won a championship or had more championships, he may mess around and be number 1. But that's not what this is. But the consolation to that is I do believe that he was the 3rd greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time. He made that title important. He made it feel like it was a big deal, and he put on classic matches against everybody that he competed with for the IC Championship. Sadly, it kind of felt like that's where he peaked in his career for championships, because of course it is, but during the time that he was winning those titles, Why didn't it feel like it was the most important title on the card? Why did it not feel like it was the most important title in the company? Mr. Perfect made it that way. So his marriage with the IC championship worked brilliantly. So number 3 on my list, not a problem at all. He did some legendary shit with that title. Number 2 was a toss-up for me, and I really jumped between the two. But at number 2, we have the Macho Man, Randy Savage. So, Randy Savage was a one-time Intercontinental champion, and he held the title for 413 days. And that is actually the second longest individual run as the Intercontinental champion. The reason I have him at number 2 is because what other title felt as important when he was the IC champion? Matches, promos, whatever it is that you want to put out there. Randy Savage was the Intercontinental champion. He made that title feel like a big deal. He made that title feel like it was worth killing each other over. And all the matches, all the feuds, all the time that he spent a year plus as the IC champion before he eventually lost it to Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, it was just legendary. Like, when you think of the greatest Intercontinental champions, not having him on your number 1 or number 2 is almost a crime and a half. But for me, I'll put him at number 2. And maybe it's just bias is why I'm doing that, but I feel like that is an appropriate spot. Coming in at number 1, we have Y2j Chris Jericho. So, Chris Jericho is a legendary Intercontinental champion, regardless of how you want to look at it. He's a 9-time IC champion, which is the most reigns in WWE history. He spent an accumulated 311 days as champion, with his longest run only coming at 111 days. Now, he's not as accomplished as some people as far as days or length of reign. And his best accomplishment as champion is his 9 runs as the IC champion. So why do I have him at number 1? Well, because it all ticked the box. Chris Jericho was somebody that could win world titles and still float between the mid card and make everything that he was doing, regardless of the championship, matter. He made his feud with Chyna, who became the first ever women's champion as the IC champion, matter. Every time he won the title, no matter how short or how long his run was, it felt like it mattered. It felt like it was a championship to have. It felt like it was a match to watch. Every match that he put on for the Intercontinental Championship was great. All the feuds that he had, whether he won or lost, were great. Like, Chris Jericho had the accomplishments. He was a champion that was elevated by the title. It felt like he had next at some point in time. And he did eventually have next. It was a great marriage. He was well accomplished. He was elevated by the championship. Every time he lost, he left it in an elevated state. If somebody fumbled that bag behind him, that's their fault. But he did everything that he was supposed to. Like I said, maybe it's my bias, but I'm marking Jericho as the number 1 greatest Intercontinental champion in WWE history. And that's my list. Let me know what you guys think. If you feel like I left some names off or put names higher than they should have been, I always appreciate that feedback. But once again, I'd like to thank you guys for watching my video. You have a great rest of your day. I'll see you next time.